Tyrone Jackson freezes as the stewardess rips his first-class ticket, staring at his tailored suit with suspicion. "There must be some mistake," she insists. His phone buzzes, the airline board confirming his acquisition of Sky Nation Airlines. A cold smile forms. Yes, there certainly is. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice served at 30,000 feet, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. This story about corporate power, racial discrimination, and sweet satisfying karma deserves your attention. So hit that like button and subscribe now if you want to see more stories about people who turned discrimination into determination. Ready to see how one man transformed a moment of humiliation into a corporate revolution? Let's continue. The morning sun glinted off the skyscrapers of Manhattan as Tyrone Jackson adjusted his custom-made Italian tie in the mirror of his penthouse apartment. At 45, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had conquered every obstacle life had thrown his way. His reflection showed a distinguished face with intelligent eyes that missed nothing, skin the color of dark mahogany, and a precisely trimmed salt and pepper beard that framed a mouth rarely given to frivolous smiles. Reservation confirmed. "Mr. Jackson," announced the automated system in his smart apartment. "Your car will arrive in 7 minutes." Tyrone nodded slightly, a habit from years of decisive action. As the self-made billionaire and CEO of Pinnacle Investments, his daily routine was orchestrated with military precision. Today, however, was no ordinary day. The flight to Chicago would culminate in his acquisition of Sky Nation Airlines, a struggling carrier that his team had identified as ripe for transformation. Under his leadership, the airline would become the jewel in his diverse portfolio of companies. His smartphone chimed with a message from Amara Washington, his executive assistant for the past 8 years. Final paperwork prepared, board members confirmed for meeting, legal team standing by. "Everything on schedule, sir." Tyrone texted back a simple, "Proceeding as planned," before slipping the phone into his jacket pocket. He took one final glance around his minimalist bedroom, eyes lingering momentarily on the framed photograph of his father standing proudly outside his small barbershop in Harlem. The memory surfaced unbidden, his father's calloused hands resting on 10-year-old Tyrone's shoulders after he'd won his first business competition at school. "You remember this feeling," his father had said. "This is what excellence tastes like." Excellence had become Tyrone's North Star. From earning scholarships to MIT and later Harvard Business School, to founding his first tech company in his garage, to building Pinnacle Investments into a global powerhouse, excellence had been his uncompromising standard. It had needed to be. As a black man in America's corporate landscape, he'd learned early that he would need to be twice as good to get half as far. The sleek black Tesla waited exactly on time, the driver holding the door with practiced deference. As Manhattan traffic parted for them, the result of Tyrone's meticulous planning rather than any traffic miracle, he reviewed the Sky Nation acquisition details on his tablet. The airline had been mismanaged for years, its corporate culture reportedly toxic, its customer service ratings abysmal. Yet its roots and overall infrastructure remained valuable. With the right leadership, it could soar again. At JFK Airport, heads turned as Tyrone strode through the terminal. His bespoke charcoal suit, the subtle platinum watch worth more than most people's annual salary, and his confident gait marked him as someone significant. He noticed the glances, some admiring, some curious, some suspicious. After decades in the spotlight, he'd developed a sixth sense for the unspoken assumptions about a black man in spaces of power. "Mr. Jackson. Excuse me, Mr. Jackson." Tyrone turned to see a young black man in his 20s approaching, professional enthusiasm lighting up his face. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir. I'm Devin Williams. I'm getting my MBA at Columbia, and I just wanted to say your lecture last semester on disruptive business models changed my entire career path." Tyrone's expression softened slightly. "Glad to hear it, Mr. Williams. Keep pushing boundaries." "I am, sir. Started my own fintech company last month. Send your pitch deck to my office. Amara Washington will make sure I see it." The young man's face registered shock, then gratitude. "Thank you, sir. I will." As Devin walked away, Tyrone felt a familiar mixture of pride and responsibility. Each interaction with young black entrepreneurs reminded him of the weight his success carried, the doors he could open for others. His phone vibrated again. Amara confirming that the Sky Nation board had accelerated their timeline, eager to complete the sale. Perfect. Tyrone had specifically booked a Sky Nation flight for today, wanting to experience the airline's service firsthand before finalizing the acquisition. Now the timing couldn't be better. He approached the first-class check-in counter, his boarding pass already displayed on his phone. The terminal buzzed with the usual airport energy. Travelers, rushing to gates, announcements echoing overhead. The perpetual hum of commerce and movement. Tyrone checked his watch. Everything on schedule. In just a few hours, he would transform an industry. But first, he would experience Sky Nation as a passenger. He had no way of knowing that this routine flight would become anything but routine. As he walked confidently toward the first-class lounge, Tyrone Jackson couldn't foresee how this day would test not just his business acumen, but the very dignity he had spent a lifetime protecting. The Sky Nation first-class check-in counter gleamed under the airport's fluorescent lighting. A large sign announced, "Premium experience begins here," in elegant silver lettering against the airline's signature blue backdrop. 3 attendants in crisp uniforms processed the privileged few with practiced smiles and deferential nods. Tyrone approached the counter, sliding his phone across the marble surface to display his digital boarding pass. "Good morning. First class to Chicago, seat 2A, he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had become his professional signature. Miranda Whitley, a blonde flight attendant in her 40s with a senior staff pin on her lapel, glanced up from her computer terminal. Her smile flickered as her eyes registered Tyrone, expensive suit, commanding presence, and black skin. Something in her expression shifted microscopically, a momentary recalibration that Tyrone had witnessed countless times before. "Good morning, sir," she replied, her tone professionally pleasant but with a new undertone of skepticism. She took his offered passport with manicured fingers, comparing the photo to his face with unusual scrutiny. "You're checking in for first class?" "That's correct," Tyrone replied evenly, noting her emphasis on first class, as if it were a question rather than a confirmation. Miranda's fingers tapped at her keyboard with heightened intensity. "I'm showing some irregularity with your reservation, sir. Could I see the credit card used for this purchase?" Tyrone maintained his composure, though his internal radar had begun to ping. This wasn't his first encounter with what he privately called success while black syndrome, the persistent disbelief that a black person could legitimately occupy spaces of privilege. "The reservation was made through my company," he explained, producing his corporate card nonetheless. "Pinnacle Investments. Everything should be in order." Miranda examined the platinum card, then returned to her computer, frowning slightly. "The system is flagging something. Let me get my supervisor." As she stepped away, Tyrone noticed other, first-class passengers being processed without similar scrutiny. An older white couple was whisked through with jovial banter. A white businessman in a suit less expensive than Tyrone's received immediate approval and directions to the lounge. Gregory Pearson, the supervisor, approached with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to resolving problems. Middle-aged, with thinning hair and an authoritative stance, he carried a tablet and a practiced customer service expression. "Good morning, Mr. Jackson, is it? I understand there's some confusion with your reservation." "There shouldn't be," Tyrone replied, maintaining his professional tone. "I have a confirmed first-class reservation to Chicago, flight SN457. By now, other passengers had begun to notice the extended interaction. A few had taken out their phones, recording the scene with varying degrees of discretion. Tyrone was acutely aware of the optics, a black man being questioned at the first-class counter, and the familiar pressure to manage both the situation and his reactions to it. Gregory reviewed the reservation details with exaggerated thoroughness. "Mr. Jackson, could I see another form of identification? It's just protocol when our system flags a reservation." "Is it protocol for all passengers or just some?" Tyrone asked, his voice level but pointed. The question hung in the air. Gregory's expression tightened. "Sir, I'm simply following procedure." Tyrone produced his driver's license, aware that each additional request represented another layer of unwarranted scrutiny. As he did so, he noticed a uniformed air marshal subtly positioning himself nearby, Brian Sanders according to his name badge, watching the interaction with unwarranted intensity. "Is there a problem here?" the air marshal asked, directing the question to Gregory rather than Tyrone. "No problem, just completing a verification," Gregory replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. The verification process continued for several more minutes, an extraordinary amount of time given the simplicity of the transaction. More passengers stared, more phones recorded. The humiliation was precisely calibrated, not overt enough to justify outrage, but persistent enough to send a clear message. You don't belong here. Finally, Gregory looked up from his tablet with a manufactured expression of regret. "Mr. Jackson, it appears first class is actually overbooked today. We'll need to reassign you to economy, but of course we'll refund the fare difference." "Overbooked?" Tyrone echoed, knowing with certainty this was false. "I confirmed this reservation yesterday. I understand your frustration, sir, but these situations do arise. We can offer you an economy plus seat with extra legroom." The subtext was clear. This far and no further. This was the line they had decided he would not cross, regardless of his ticket, regardless of his rights. In that moment, Tyrone made a calculation. He could escalate the confrontation, demand his rightful seat, become the angry black man they perhaps expected him to be. Or he could accept the temporary indignity with the knowledge of what was to come. His phone vibrated in his pocket, likely Amara with news about the accelerated board meeting. "Economy will be fine," he said finally, his voice betraying none of the anger he felt. "I trust the refund will be processed promptly." Relief washed over Gregory's face. Crisis averted. Difficult customer managed. "Of course, Mr. Jackson. Right away." As Tyrone accepted his new boarding pass, he overheard Miranda murmuring to another attendant. "Probably used points or some promotion. They always think they can game the system." He walked away, spine straight, expression neutral, a lifetime of similar moments having taught him the art of dignified withdrawal. But as he headed toward the economy boarding gate, Tyrone Jackson was already formulating a response that would transform this moment of discrimination into a reckoning none of them would soon forget. His phone buzzed again with Amara's message. Board meeting moved up, all paperwork prepared for immediate execution of acquisition. Perfect timing indeed. The contrast between first class and economy couldn't have been more stark as Tyrone Jackson made his way down the narrow aisle toward seat 23B. Gone were the spacious leather seats and attentive service of the premium cabin, replaced by tightly packed rows and the barely disguised impatience of overworked flight attendants. Tyrone navigated the cramped space with practiced dignity, his tall frame awkwardly folding into the middle seat. On his left sat an elderly woman already dozing against the window, and to his right, an Asian American man in his 30s wearing a rumpled suit and typing furiously on a laptop. Have you ever wondered what goes through someone's mind when they're forced to swallow their pride? When they know they're being discriminated against but choose to bide their time? If you've experienced something similar, type justice in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories about people who turned adversity into advantage. What would you do in Tyrone's situation? Continue watching to see how one calculated decision changed an entire company forever. Excuse me, sir. Can I help you with your bag? Tyrone looked up to see a flight attendant, different from those at the check-in counter. Her name tag read, Shauna Williams. She was black, appeared to be in her early 30s, and her smile held a genuine warmth lacking in his previous interactions. I'm fine, thank you, Tyrone replied, stowing his briefcase under the seat in front of him. Something flickered across Shauna's face. Recognition, perhaps, or solidarity. She leaned slightly closer. I saw what happened at check-in, she said quietly. It happens too often with Sky Nation, I'm sorry. The simple acknowledgement caught Tyrone by surprise. In the calculated indignities of professional racism, the gaslighting was often as damaging as the discrimination itself. The persistent suggestion that perhaps you'd imagined it, perhaps you were being too sensitive, perhaps there was some other explanation. Thank you, he said simply. Shauna glanced around to ensure no supervisors were nearby. I've worked here 5 years. It's systematic. They train us to profile for security reasons, but we all know what that really means. Tyrone nodded, studying her more carefully. Have you reported it? A sad smile crossed her face. 3 times. Each time, suddenly my schedule gets worse, my performance reviews suffer, and management finds reasons to write me up. I've got 2 kids in college. I can't afford to lose this job. Before she could say more, another passenger called for assistance, and Shauna moved away with a final meaningful glance. Tyrone made a mental note of her name, adding it to the growing list of details he was compiling. That was brave of her, commented the Asian American man beside him, who had paused his typing and was now watching Tyrone with interest. I'm James Chen, by the way. Tyrone Jackson. Recognition dawned on James's face. The Tyrone Jackson? Pinnacle Investments? The same. I thought you looked familiar. I'm an attorney with Midwest Civil Liberties Union. I specialize in discrimination cases. He lowered his voice. I saw what happened at the gate. Textbook case of racial profiling. You think so? Tyrone asked, genuinely interested in the legal perspective. Without question. I've litigated dozens of similar cases. The selective application of verification protocols, the manufactured overbooking, the air marshal hovering nearby as if your presence constituted a threat. All of it designed to seem procedural while actually being discriminatory. Tyrone considered this information, adding it to his mental dossier. What's your success rate with such cases? Mixed, James admitted. Corporations have deep pockets and good lawyers, but Sky Nation has a particularly problematic record. In the last 3 years, they've had 27 discrimination complaints filed against them, far above industry average. This was valuable intelligence. How do you know that number specifically? I've been building a class action case, just haven't found the right plaintiff yet. James studied Tyrone thoughtfully. Someone with resources, credibility, and the courage to withstand a corporate smear campaign. Tyrone nodded, revealing nothing of his plans. Instead, he connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi and opened his secure email. A message from Amara awaited him with the completed acquisition paperwork attached, requiring only his final authorization. Would you excuse me? He asked James. I have some business to attend to. As James returned to his laptop, Tyrone began his research in earnest. Using his executive access codes, he delved into Sky Nation's employee reviews, customer complaints, and internal policies. What emerged was a disturbing pattern. Systematic discrimination concealed beneath layers of corporate policy and plausible deniability. A memory surfaced. His father, facing similar treatment at a local bank in Harlem, denied a small business loan despite perfect credit. They'll never give us an even playing field, his father had told him. So you'll have to buy the whole damn field. That wisdom had guided Tyrone's career strategy. Rather than fighting for acceptance within existing power structures, he had built his own. And now, he was about to apply that philosophy to Sky Nation Airlines. He texted his legal team. Initiate Protocol Omega. Full board authority required. Immediately. The response came swiftly. Authorized. Board meeting confirmed for your arrival. All members standing by. Tyrone glanced around the cabin, noting the stark class divisions of air travel. The elite experience of first class versus the cattle car treatment of economy. How many other black passengers had faced the same discrimination he had today? How many had lacked the resources to fight back? His phone buzzed again with messages of support from other executives who had somehow already heard about the incident. The power of social media never ceased to amaze him. What had happened just hours ago was already generating buzz in corporate circles. Mr. Jackson? Shauna had returned with a glass of water. I brought this for you, and I wanted to let you know that what happened today, it happens all the time. At least twice a week I see black executives or well-dressed passengers challenged about their first-class tickets. It's unofficial policy. Thank you, Ms. Williams. I appreciate your candor. He paused, then asked, if things were different at Sky Nation, if the culture changed, would you want to be part of that change? surprise registered on her face. In a heartbeat. This company has good people trapped in a bad system. Tyrone handed her his business card, simple, elegant, with only his name and a phone number. Perhaps we'll speak again soon. As Shauna moved away, looking slightly bewildered, James leaned over. You're planning something, aren't you? Tyrone allowed himself a small smile. Let's just say I believe in corrective action. For the remainder of the flight, Tyrone methodically built his strategy, the humiliation of the gate incident crystallizing into clear purpose. By the time the captain announced their descent into Chicago, Tyrone Jackson had formulated not just a response to his personal mistreatment, but a complete restructuring of Sky Nation Airlines, beginning with those responsible for fostering its discriminatory culture. What would you do if you had the power to change an entire company culture? Would you seek personal revenge or systemic change? Comment change if you believe in transforming broken systems, and subscribe if you want to see more stories about corporate justice. Have you ever witnessed discrimination in a service industry? The next part of this story shows exactly how accountability works when someone has the courage to demand it. Somewhere over Pennsylvania, as Sky Nation Flight 457 cruised at 33,000 feet, Tyrone Jackson's world simultaneously expanded and contracted. His phone, connected to the aircraft's Wi-Fi, buzzed with increasing frequency as what had begun as a routine instance of discrimination morphed into something far more significant. Sir? James Chen, still beside him, turned his laptop screen toward Tyrone. You might want to see this. The screen displayed a Twitter feed where a video was gaining traction by the minute. The footage, shaky but clear enough, showed Tyrone's confrontation at the first-class counter from the perspective of a waiting passenger. The caption read, "Black executive denied first-class seat on a Sky Nation Air, despite valid ticket. Watch how they treat him. Sus flying while black." The view count already exceeded 50,000 and was climbing rapidly. That was fast, Tyrone remarked, his voice betraying no emotion. Social media doesn't wait, James replied. The court of public opinion moves at light speed these days. Tyrone's phone chimed with a text from Amara. Incident trending. Sky Nation. PR team issuing statement. Advise on our response? He typed back. No response yet. Let them dig their hole deeper. As if on cue, Sky Nation's official Twitter account posted a statement that made Tyrone shake his head in disbelief. Sky Nation is aware of a video circulating regarding a boarding procedure. We are investigating the matter. Sky Nation has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and is committed to providing excellent service to all passengers regardless of race, gender, or background. The boilerplate response was already generating backlash, with users pointing out the disconnect between the statement and the reality captured on video. Textbook corporate non-apology, James observed. Acknowledge the controversy without acknowledging the wrongdoing. Tyrone nodded, remembering the media training session he'd undergone years ago when Pinnacle Investments went public. The trainer, a former network journalist, had been blunt. As a black CEO, you'll be scrutinized differently. Your anger will be labeled as aggression, your confidence as arrogance. Always control the narrative before someone else does. That advice had served him well, teaching him that strategic silence could be more powerful than immediate reaction. Now, as the controversy unfolded without his input, that silence was creating a vacuum that Sky Nation was failing to fill effectively. His phone rang. Journalist Zoe Martinez from Business Insider, somehow having obtained his private number. Tyrone sent it to voicemail, knowing that his response needed to be perfectly calibrated. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about setting a precedent. The aircraft's entertainment system switched to a news channel, and Tyrone caught a glimpse of Sky Nation CEO Victor Reynolds giving a hasty interview outside corporate headquarters in Dallas. "We take these allegations very seriously," Reynolds was saying, his expression a mask of corporate concern. "However, we believe this situation has been mischaracterized. Our staff follows strict protocols for all passengers, and we categorically deny any discriminatory intent." The reporter pressed. The video clearly shows other first-class passengers being processed without similar scrutiny. How do you explain that? Reynolds' smile tightened. Individual interactions can appear differently on camera than they are in reality. We're conducting a thorough review. He's making it worse, James muttered. Yes, he is, Tyrone agreed, feeling a coldly professional satisfaction as Sky Nation's stock ticker appeared on the screen, showing a 2% drop in the last hour. A flight attendant passed by, glancing nervously at Tyrone as if suddenly realizing the significance of having him aboard. Word was spreading through the cabin as more passengers recognized him from the viral video or from his business reputation. The middle-aged woman across the aisle leaned toward him. I saw what they did to you at the gate. It was shameful. My husband and I are frequent flyers with Sky Nation, but after this we're changing airlines. Thank you for your support, Tyrone replied diplomatically. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, causing momentary alarm throughout the cabin. Tyrone found it an apt metaphor for the corporate upheaval happening simultaneously on the ground. Sky Nation was experiencing turbulence of a different kind, one that wouldn't be resolved by simply fastening seatbelts. His phone alerted him to a new trending hashtag, First Class While Black. Users were sharing their own stories of discrimination on airlines, creating a tapestry of similar experiences that validated what Tyrone had faced. The incident was rapidly transforming from an individual case into a movement. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on him. As one of the few black CEOs of a Fortune 500 company, his actions carried symbolic significance beyond his personal experience. How he responded would set a precedent for how such incidents might be handled in the future. His phone rang again, this time his teenage daughter, Zara. Dad, are you okay? Your gate video is everywhere. My friends are all sharing it. Tyrone softened his voice. I'm fine, honey. Just another day of being black in America. Are you going to sue them? She asked, the righteous indignation of youth evident in her voice. No, he replied. I'm going to do something much more effective. What? You'll see soon enough. But remember what I've always taught you. Respond strategically, not emotionally. After reassuring his daughter, Tyrone returned to his planning. The timing of his corporate move would be crucial for maximum impact. Too soon, and it might appear as petty retaliation. Too late, and the connection to the discriminatory incident would be diluted. The flight was now beginning its descent into Chicago. Tyrone closed his laptop and stared out at the approaching skyline, understanding that what had happened today represented more than just his personal humiliation. It was a pivotal moment for corporate accountability in America, a test case for whether companies could be forced to reckon with the racial biases embedded in their cultures. As the wheels touched down on the tarmac, Tyrone Jackson prepared for a different kind of landing, one that would shake Sky Nation Airlines to its very foundation. The seatbelt sign dinged off as Sky Nation Flight 457 completed its taxi to the gate at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Passengers rose in the choreographed chaos of deplaning, retrieving bags from overhead compartments and forming the impatient queue in the aisle. Tyrone Jackson remained seated, calmly reviewing documents on his tablet while the cabin emptied around him. Aren't you getting off? James Chen asked, standing to retrieve his laptop bag. Momentarily, Tyrone replied. I have a meeting to prepare for. James handed him a business card. If you need legal perspective on what happened today, call me. What they did was textbook discrimination. Tyrone accepted the card with a nod. I appreciate that, Mr. Chen. I suspect we'll be in touch soon. As James departed, Tyrone noticed Miranda Whitley, the flight attendant from the check-in counter, now standing near the cockpit door, observing him with poorly disguised concern. She whispered something to Gregory Pearson, who had apparently also been aboard, serving as the flight's customer service manager. Their nervousness was palpable. The viral video had clearly made its way through the crew's communication channels, and Tyrone's continued presence on the emptying aircraft had become a source of visible anxiety. His phone chimed with a message from his legal team. Acquisition. Paperwork complete. Sky Nation is officially under Pinnacle control as of 2:17 p.m. Central Time. Tyrone allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He was no longer just a passenger who had been discriminated against. He was now, effectively, the owner of Sky Nation Airlines. Mr. Jackson? Gregory approached with a strained attempt at professional courtesy. "Is there something else we can assist you with today?" "Actually, there is," Tyrone replied, rising from his seat with deliberate calm. "I'd like to speak with the Chicago station manager immediately." Gregory's expression faltered. "Sir, if this is about the seating issue at JFK, I assure you we're taking it very seriously. Customer relations will be in touch about compensation." "I'm not interested in compensation, Mr. Pearson. I'm interested in accountability. The station manager, please." The authoritative tone left no room for negotiation. Gregory fumbled with his radio, requesting the manager's presence while Miranda hovered nearby, her earlier confidence now replaced by visible apprehension. Within minutes, a harried-looking woman in her 50s hurried down the jet bridge and onto the aircraft. Diana Foster, according to her name badge, was Sky Nation's chief operations officer for the Chicago hub, a fact that Tyrone had already learned from his research into the company's organizational structure. "Mr. Jackson, I'm Diana Foster," she began, extending her hand with professional urgency. "I want to personally apologize for any misunderstanding that occurred during your check-in process today. Sky Nation values all our customers, and we're committed to making this right." Tyrone accepted the handshake, but not the premise. "There was no misunderstanding, Ms. Foster. There was discrimination captured on video, witnessed by dozens, and now viewed by millions. But we can discuss that in detail shortly. I have a board meeting to attend, and you're going to join me." Confusion crossed her face. "Board meeting? I don't understand." As of 17 minutes ago, Pinnacle Investments completed its acquisition of Sky Nation Airlines. I now hold controlling interest in this company, so when I request your presence at a board meeting, it's not a suggestion. It's a directive from your new owner. The color drained from Diana's face as the implications set in. Gregory and Miranda, still within earshot, exchanged looks of dawning horror. "That's not possible," Diana stammered. "We're a publicly traded company. There would have been announcements, regulatory filings." "All completed according to SEC requirements," Tyrone assured her. "The acquisition has been in process for months. Today's event simply accelerated our timeline." He gestured toward the exit. "My car is waiting to take us to the Marriott O'Hare, where the board has convened an emergency session. Gregory and Miranda will accompany us as well. They have first-hand knowledge that will be valuable to our discussion." The 3 airline employees followed Tyrone in stunned silence through the terminal and into the black Suburban waiting at the curb. The 20-minute drive to the hotel passed without conversation, the shock of the situation settling over the Sky Nation staff like a heavy fog. The Marriott's executive conference room had been hastily converted into a boardroom, with Tyrone's team working with characteristic efficiency. Around the polished table sat the existing Sky Nation board members, looking uncomfortable and out of place alongside Pinnacle executives joining via video conference on large screens mounted on the wall. Amara Washington, elegant and formidable in a tailored navy suit, approached as Tyrone entered. "Everything is prepared, sir," she said quietly. "Legal has the documentation ready, and HR is standing by for your decisions." Tyrone nodded his thanks and took his position at the head of the table, indicating that Diana, Gregory, and Miranda should sit in the empty chairs to his right. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice commanding immediate attention. "For those who don't know me, I am Tyrone Jackson, CEO of Pinnacle Investments, and as of today, Executive Chairman of Sky Nation Airlines." He paused, allowing the statement to settle over the room. Some of you may have seen the video circulating online of an incident that occurred this morning at JFK Airport, in which a Sky Nation employee denied a first-class passenger his rightful seat due to racial profiling. Several board members shifted, uncomfortably. What you may not know is that the passenger was me. A tense silence enveloped the room. I had planned to experience your airline as a customer before finalizing our acquisition. What I experienced instead was a disturbing demonstration of the discriminatory culture that has been allowed to flourish under current leadership. Tyrone opened a folder and extracted several documents. These are statistics on Sky Nation's treatment of minority passengers over the past 3 years, compiled from customer complaints, social media reports, and internal records. They show a pattern of discriminatory behavior that is not just morally reprehensible, but legally actionable and financially disastrous. He slid the documents across the table. As the new controlling stakeholder in this company, I could simply fire everyone in this room and start fresh. That would be my right. However, I believe in addressing root causes rather than symptoms. Diana Foster raised her hand tentatively. Mr. Jackson, while I deeply regret your experience, I must point out that isolated incidents don't necessarily reflect company-wide problems. Ms. Foster, Tyrone interrupted. When a flight attendant and supervisor single out the only black passenger in the first-class line for verification, when they manufacture an overbooking situation that didn't exist, when they call an air marshal to monitor a passenger who has shown no signs of aggression, that is not an isolated incident. That is policy and practice, whether written or unwritten. He turned to the board members. My team has identified systemic issues within Sky Nation that have created a hostile environment for both minority passengers and employees. Addressing these issues isn't just the right thing to do. It's essential for the company's survival. Tyrone laid out his non-negotiable conditions: an immediate audit of all customer service policies, mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, creation of a diversity and inclusion officer position reporting directly to the CEO, and a transparent review of all discrimination complaints from the past 5 years. Additionally, he continued, those responsible for fostering this toxic culture will be removed from their positions, effective immediately. Victor Reynolds, Sky Nation's soon-to-be former CEO, joining via video conference, finally found his voice. This is outrageous. You can't just walk in and dismantle an entire executive team based on one unfortunate incident. Mr. Reynolds. Tyrone cut in, his tone measured but firm. Your public statement earlier today demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of leadership. When presented with clear evidence of discrimination within your organization, you chose denial over accountability. That alone disqualifies you from leading this company forward. He addressed the entire room. Make no mistake, what happened to me today happens to Black travelers, Asian travelers, Hispanic travelers, and other minorities every day on your airline. The difference is that most of them don't have the resources or platform to demand justice. I do, and I will use that leverage not just for personal vindication, but for systematic change. The ultimatum was clear: accept new leadership and anti-discrimination policies, or resign. The choice, while presented as an option, was effectively no choice at all. As the reality of the situation sank in, Tyrone Jackson watched the power dynamics in the room shift like tectonic plates, a corporate earthquake with himself as the epicenter. By the meeting's end, the transformation of Sky Nation Airlines had begun, starting with those who had mistakenly believed that first-class treatment was determined by the color of one's skin, rather than the ticket in one's hand. The Marriott O'Hare quickly transformed into Sky Nation's temporary headquarters as Tyrone Jackson orchestrated what employees would later call the Great Reckoning. Within hours of the emergency board meeting, the hotel's entire executive floor had been commandeered, with conference rooms converted to interview spaces and suites, serving as command centers for various aspects of the corporate restructuring. Tyrone established himself in the presidential suite, a spacious corner room with views of O'Hare's runways, where planes took off and landed in metronomic precision, a visual reminder of the airline business that now partially belonged to him. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had been deemed unworthy of a first-class seat just hours ago, and now he controlled the entire fleet. Have you ever witnessed someone face consequences for discrimination they thought they would get away with? The moment when realization dawns that actions have repercussions? If you believe businesses should be held accountable for how they treat people, comment accountability below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about justice being served. What do you think should happen to employees who enforce discriminatory policies? Keep watching to see how Tyrone balances justice with compassion in rebuilding a broken company culture. Mr. Jackson, your crisis management team has arrived, Amara announced, entering with her customary efficiency. Tyrone looked up from his laptop to see a diverse group filing into the suite's living area. Marcus Washington, his trusted HR director from Pinnacle, James Chen, the civil rights attorney from the flight, and somewhat surprisingly, Shauna Williams, the flight attendant who had shown him kindness in economy class. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Tyrone began, standing to greet them. "Each of you brings a valuable perspective to what we need to accomplish." He turned to Shauna, who appeared both nervous and resolute in civilian clothes, having changed out of her Sky Nation uniform. "Ms. Williams, I particularly appreciate your courage. Speaking up as a current employee carries significant risk." "Less risk than staying silent another day," she replied with quiet determination. "I've watched too many passengers and colleagues suffer under Sky Nation's culture." Tyrone nodded appreciatively before addressing the group. "We have 3 primary objectives. First, to identify and address those responsible for fostering a discriminatory environment. Second, to implement immediate policy changes to prevent further incidents. And third, to transform Sky Nation's culture fundamentally and permanently." Marcus Washington, a former corporate psychologist with a reputation for ethical leadership development, spoke up. "We should begin with individual interviews of key personnel, particularly those involved in today's incident. Their responses under pressure will reveal more than any HR file." "Agreed," Tyrone said. "Amara has scheduled interviews beginning in 30 minutes. We'll start with Miranda Whitley and Gregory Pearson." James Chen raised a practical concern. "From a legal standpoint, we need to document everything meticulously. If terminations result, which seems likely, we should anticipate wrongful termination suits." "Already addressed," Tyrone assured him. "Every interview will be recorded with consent, and Pinnacle's legal team has prepared documentation of Sky Nation's pattern of discrimination, which constitutes legal grounds for removing those who implemented or enforced such policies." The planning continued for another 20 minutes, with Shauna providing invaluable insider information about the company's unwritten practices and the key personnel who enforced them most zealously. At precisely 6:00 p.m., Miranda Whitley arrived. For her interview, the confidence she had displayed at the check-in counter now replaced by visible anxiety. She sat stiffly in the offered chair, facing Tyrone, Marcus, and James across a polished conference table. "Ms. Whitley," Tyrone began, his tone professionally neutral. "Thank you for joining us. This interview is being recorded, and the purpose is to understand the events at JFK this morning and the broader customer service practices at Sky Nation. Do you consent to this recording?" After a hesitant affirmation, the questioning began. Marcus led with seemingly innocuous inquiries about her employment history and training, before gradually steering toward the specific incident. "In your 10 years with Sky Nation, have you received any specific training regarding passenger verification procedures?" he asked. Miranda shifted in her seat. "Yes. We have standard protocols for verifying passenger identities and reservations. Are these protocols applied equally to all passengers?" A pause. "They're supposed to be. But in practice?" Another, longer pause. "We're encouraged to use our judgment about which passengers might present concerns." "What kind of concerns?" Marcus pressed. "Security issues, fraud, passengers who might not belong in certain cabins." "And how do you determine who belongs?" Miranda's discomfort increased visibly. "It's just experience. You develop an instinct." "Ms. Whitley," Tyrone interjected. "Earlier today, you determined that I didn't belong in first class despite my valid ticket. What specifically about me triggered your instinct?" The direct question hung in the air. Miranda's gaze dropped to the table. "I was just following our informal guidelines." "And what guidelines are those?" After several attempts at evasion, Miranda finally admitted what Tyrone already knew. Sky Nation had an unwritten but widely understood practice of subjecting minority passengers to additional scrutiny, particularly in premium cabins. "It comes from management," she explained, a note of defensiveness entering her voice. "They never say it explicitly, but the message is clear. Certain passengers don't fit the Sky Nation image they want in first class. We're evaluated on cabin. Environment maintenance, which everyone knows means keeping the premium experience exclusive. By interview's end, Miranda had revealed far more than she likely intended about the systematic nature of the discrimination, implicating several executives in the process. Gregory Pearson's interview followed a similar pattern, though with more corporate jargon and attempts to deflect responsibility. When confronted with specific statistics showing disproportionate verification incidents involving minority passengers, his professional facade crumbled. "Look, I don't make the policies," he insisted. "I just implement what comes down from Dallas." "And if those policies are discriminatory?" James Chen asked. "That's above my pay grade," Gregory replied, unknowingly sealing his professional fate with his abdication of ethical responsibility. Throughout the evening and into the night, the interviews continued. Diana Foster reluctantly disclosed internal communications that revealed executives' awareness of discrimination complaints and their systematic dismissal of them. Lower-level employees, sensing the changing tide, became increasingly forthcoming about the toxic culture they had been forced to navigate. Tyrone and his team worked methodically, building a comprehensive picture of Sky Nation's discriminatory ecosystem, from hiring practices that favored certain demographics for customer-facing positions to promotion patterns that kept minorities in lower-level roles. By midnight, Tyrone had compiled enough evidence to justify a significant restructuring. In the quiet of the presidential suite, he reviewed the personnel files of those implicated in the worst practices. "The patterns are undeniable," Marcus observed, examining the data they had collected. "It's not just individual bias, it's institutional." Tyrone nodded grimly, which means the solution must be institutional as well. A knock at the door revealed Shauna, returning from her own investigation among flight crew members. "You need to see this," she said, presenting a folder of flight manifests she had obtained from sympathetic colleagues. The documents revealed what Tyrone had suspected: a pattern of passenger reassignments that disproportionately affected minority travelers. First-class and business-class seats had been routinely denied to qualified minority passengers under various pretexts. Exactly as had happened to him. At 2:00 a.m., Tyrone called for Victor Reynolds, Sky Nation's CEO, who had been waiting anxiously in another suite. The confrontation was brief, but definitive. "The evidence is irrefutable," Tyrone informed him, presenting the documentation they had amassed. The discriminatory practices at Sky Nation weren't isolated incidents. They were systematic, pervasive, and encouraged from the top. Reynolds attempted one last defense. "This is corporate espionage. You've manipulated disgruntled employees to build a false narrative." "Save it," Tyrone interrupted. "I'm not a prosecutor, and this isn't a trial. This is a business decision. Your leadership has created legal liability, damaged the brand, and violated basic ethical standards. You're terminated effective immediately." By dawn, Tyrone had made the painful but necessary decision to remove not just Reynolds, but 8 other executives and senior managers, including Miranda and Gregory. Some would receive severance packages contingent upon non-disclosure agreements. Others, whose actions had been more egregious, would be dismissed without compensation. As the Chicago skyline brightened with the first light of day, Tyrone stood at the window of the presidential suite, contemplating the magnitude of what lay ahead. Firing those responsible was only the beginning. Rebuilding Sky Nation into a company where such discrimination could never again take root would be the true challenge. A moment of doubt crossed his mind. Was transformational change truly possible? In an industry and a society where racial biases ran so deep, could one acquisition, one moment of accountability really make a difference? His phone rang, his father calling from New York, having seen the viral video and subsequent news about the acquisition. "Son," the older man said, his voice carrying the wisdom of decades, "what you're doing now, this is why you built your success. Not for the money or the power, but for moments like this when you can change something broken into something better." Tyrone felt his resolve strengthen. "I learned that from you, Dad. You never just complained about the system. You built your own alternatives. And now you're doing the same, just on a bigger scale. I'm proud of you, son." As he ended the call, Tyrone Jackson turned back to the mountain of work awaiting him. The corporate cleansing was complete. The rebuilding would Now begin. What would you change first if you suddenly owned a company with a discriminatory culture? Would you focus on policy, people, or public perception? Comment below with policy, people, or perception to share your approach. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more stories about corporate transformation. The real test of leadership isn't just removing toxic elements, but building something better in their place. Keep watching to see how Tyrone handles the inevitable backlash to his bold actions. The first hint of dawn was breaking over Chicago's skyline when Tyrone Jackson, having worked through the night, gave the order that would ignite a media firestorm. Schedule the press conference for 9 a.m. Amara Washington, who had maintained her impeccable efficiency despite the grueling hours, nodded and immediately began making arrangements. Location? She asked. The Sky Nation hangar at O'Hare, Tyrone decided. Symbolic. The rebuilding starts where the actual work happens, not in some sterile corporate headquarters. Within minutes, the announcement went out. Tyrone Jackson, CEO of Pinnacle Investments and new controlling stakeholder of Sky Nation Airlines, would address the media regarding yesterday's viral discrimination incident and the company's future. The press release, deliberately sparse on details, created exactly the sense of anticipation Tyrone intended. As his team prepared, Tyrone took a rare moment of solitude to gather his thoughts. The stakes extended far beyond one airline or one incident. In America's corporate landscape, accountability for racial discrimination typically followed a predictable script: public apology, promise of sensitivity training, perhaps a donation to an appropriate cause, but rarely fundamental change in power structures or company culture. Today, he would rewrite that script. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Washington. Leaked emails from Reynolds circulating among former executives. They're preparing counter-narrative. Tyrone had anticipated this. Displaced power never surrenders quietly. Forward to legal, he replied. Document everything. Another alert. Miranda Whitley, the flight attendant from yesterday's incident, had given an interview to a conservative news outlet, claiming she was the victim of reverse discrimination and corporate bullying. The narrative was already being twisted. The story reframed as the persecution of hardworking airline staff by a vindictive billionaire. Tyrone remained focused. The truth, methodically documented throughout the night, would speak louder than defensive spin. At 7:30 a.m., as he reviewed his presentation one final time, James Chen entered with concerning news. Senator William Bradford is trying to politicize the situation, he reported. He's calling for a congressional inquiry into what he's terming a hostile corporate takeover with racial motivations. Tyrone nodded, unsurprised. Bradford, a politician known for dog-whistle rhetoric and corporate allegiances, had received significant campaign contributions from Sky Nation's previous leadership. Let him, Tyrone replied calmly. This isn't about politics. It's about basic human dignity and corporate responsibility. We stay on message. By 8:45 a.m., the Sky Nation maintenance hangar had been transformed. A podium bearing the company's logo stood before rows of chairs filled with journalists from every major network and publication. Behind the podium, a massive Sky Nation aircraft served as backdrop, a visual reminder of what was at stake. Tyrone, freshly showered and changed into a new suit brought by Amara, stood in the small preparation room, reviewing final notes with his team. Shauna Williams, who would be introduced as Sky Nation's new Chief Diversity Officer, waited nervously beside him. Remember, Tyrone told her, your story represents thousands of employees who've endured this culture. Your voice matters here. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Tyrone Jackson stepped to the podium, facing a forest of cameras and the skeptical expressions of journalists prepared for the usual corporate damage control. What they received instead would make headlines across the globe. Good morning, he began, his voice steady and resolute. Yesterday, as a black man with a valid first-class ticket, I was denied my rightful seat on a Sky Nation flight. The incident, captured on video and witnessed by dozens, has sparked important conversations about discrimination in customer service. But this press conference is not about one man's experience in first class. It's about thousands of passengers, experiences in an industry where dignity should not be determined by the color of one's skin. He continued with methodical precision, outlining the evidence gathered overnight: statistical patterns of minority passenger reassignments, internal communications revealing executive awareness of discriminatory practices, and testimony from employees who had been instructed to maintain the airline's image through selective application of policies. What happened to me was not an isolated incident or the action of a few individuals. It was the predictable result of a corporate culture that tacitly encouraged discrimination while maintaining plausible deniability. The room was utterly silent, journalists frantically taking notes rather than shouting questions. As the new, controlling stakeholder in Sky Nation Airlines, I could have simply accepted an apology, taken my rightful seat, and moved on. Instead, I chose to use this moment to implement the changes that countless passengers and employees have been denied for years. Tyrone then announced the sweeping changes: the removal of 9 executives, including CEO Victor Reynolds, the implementation of comprehensive anti-bias training, a top-to-bottom review of all customer service policies, and a third-party audit of hiring, promotion, and passenger treatment patterns. Effective immediately, Sky Nation will establish an independent oversight committee composed of civil rights leaders, industry experts, and customer advocates. This committee will have real power to review policies, investigate complaints, and ensure accountability at all levels. He introduced Shauna Williams, whose promotion from flight attendant to chief diversity officer sent a clear message about valuing those who spoke truth to power. When Shauna stepped to the microphone and shared her experiences witnessing discrimination against both passengers and fellow employees, the human dimension of the story crystallized. The question period that followed was predictably hostile. From some quarters, a reporter from a right-leaning network challenged Tyrone directly. "Isn't this really about personal revenge rather than corporate responsibility? You used your financial power to punish people who offended you personally." Tyrone's response was measured but firm. If seeking accountability for documented discrimination affecting thousands of people constitutes revenge, then we have a fundamental misunderstanding of justice. This isn't about me. It's about establishing that no corporation is too powerful to be held accountable for how it treats human beings. Another journalist asked about the employees who had been terminated. "Don't these individuals deserve due process rather than summary dismissal?" Every terminated employee received exactly what they denied countless passengers: a fair evaluation based on their actions rather than preconceptions, Tyrone replied. Each dismissal is supported by documented evidence of their role in implementing or enforcing discriminatory practices. This isn't capricious action, it's long overdue accountability. The press conference continued for nearly 2 hours, with Tyrone masterfully elevating the conversation beyond the specific incident to address systemic issues in corporate America. By its conclusion, the narrative had shifted significantly. What had begun as a story about one black executive's mistreatment had evolved into a watershed moment for corporate accountability. As Tyrone predicted, Sky Nation's stock initially plummeted as markets opened, dropping nearly 12% in the first hour of trading. But by early afternoon, as analysts digested the substantive changes and the company's new direction, the slide slowed and then stabilized. Several major institutional investors issued statements supporting the leadership change, citing long-term concerns about Sky Nation's corporate culture and its impact on valuation. By evening, a new hashtag was trending: "Flying with Dignity," as passengers shared their support for the reforms and their own experiences with discrimination in air travel. Civil rights organizations issued statements praising the concrete actions rather than empty promises, and several other airlines hastily announced reviews of their own customer service policies. In the temporary command center at the Marriott, Tyrone reviewed the day's media coverage with his team. The story had dominated every news cycle, with analyses ranging from glowing approval to skeptical criticism to outright hostility, largely splitting along predictable ideological lines. "We've struck a nerve," James observed, scrolling through social media reactions. "People are having real conversations about corporate responsibility for discrimination." "That's the point," Tyrone replied. "This was never just about Sky Nation. It's about establishing a new standard for accountability." As night fell over Chicago, Tyrone Jackson allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. The first and perhaps most difficult day of Sky Nation's transformation had been navigated successfully, but he harbored no illusions about the challenges ahead. The forces of resistance were gathering, and the real test of his vision for a reformed corporate culture was just beginning. 1 week after the press conference that had captivated the nation, Tyrone Jackson stood at the window of his temporary office in Sky Nation's Chicago Operations Center, watching planes taxi across O'Hare's vast concrete expanse. The symbolic value of his location wasn't lost on the employees who passed his open door. The new boss had established himself in the heart of operations, not in an isolated executive suite. "Mr. Jackson," Amara called from the doorway, "we have a situation." Tyrone turned from the window, recognizing the particular tone his assistant used for significant problems. "What now?" "The implementation team in Dallas is reporting systematic obstruction. Critical files missing, passwords changed, scheduled trainings mysteriously canceled." Tyrone nodded, unsurprised. The honeymoon was bound to end sometime. "What's the status on the lawsuits?" 7 filed as of this morning, Amara reported, handing him a tablet with the details. "All former executives claiming wrongful termination, defamation, and various contract violations. Our legal team expects at least 5 more by week's end." The resistance had been building steadily since the initial shock of the takeover wore off. What had begun as passive obstruction, missed meetings, misplaced documents, deliberately slow compliance, had evolved into coordinated opposition. Tyrone reviewed the lawsuit details, noting the common language that suggested coordinated, legal strategy. "They're working together," he observed. "Who's funding this?" "We believe Victor Reynolds is coordinating from behind the scenes," Amara replied. Financial forensics identified unusual transfers from his personal accounts to several shell companies the day after his termination. The door opened again, and Marcus Washington entered with a grim expression. "You need to see this," he said, opening his laptop to display an internal company messaging board. The screen showed dozens of posts from current employees expressing anger and fear about the changes, many using nearly identical language about rushed implementation and unfair targeting of longtime staff. "Astroturfing," Tyrone concluded. "Reynolds or someone in his circle is feeding them talking points." Marcus nodded. "It gets worse. We've identified what appears to be a sabotage attempt in the reservation system. Someone with high-level access tried to introduce code that would have caused major disruptions to the new equitable seating algorithms." This was the challenge Tyrone had anticipated from the beginning. Transforming a corporate culture meant confronting not just policies, but people deeply invested in maintaining the status quo. For every employee who welcomed the changes, others viewed them as a threat to their position, their authority, or their worldview. His phone rang, James Chen calling with more concerning news. "Air Marshal Brian Sanders has gone public with his version of the incident," James reported. "He's claiming you were argumentative and potentially threatening at the gate, and that's why he was called to monitor the situation." "That's verifiably false," Tyrone replied calmly. "The video clearly shows otherwise." "Yes, but he's being featured on several news programs, and his uniform gives him credibility with certain audiences. He's become a rallying point for the opposition." The pushback was intensifying on multiple fronts. Later that morning, Tyrone learned that Miranda Whitley had organized a protest outside Sky Nation's Dallas headquarters, featuring about 60 former and current employees holding signs with slogans like "Experience matters more than politics" and "Stop the corporate purge." Though relatively small, the protest received disproportionate media coverage, particularly from outlets ideologically predisposed to frame the situation as reverse discrimination or woke capitalism gone too far. By midday, Tyrone faced a new challenge from an unexpected source, the Sky Nation board itself. Though he held controlling interest, several legacy board members were pushing back against the pace and scope of changes. "The quarterly projections are concerning," argued Lawrence Fitzgerald, a silver-haired banker who had served on the board for 15 years. "Bookings are down 12% since the announcement. We need to consider a more moderate approach to these reforms. Tyrone studied the man across the conference table, understanding that this was a pivotal moment. If he showed weakness now, the momentum for real change would be lost. "Mr. Fitzgerald," he replied, "those projections reflect short-term reaction to controversy, not long-term business fundamentals. Would you have preferred we continued discriminatory practices to maintain bookings?" "Of course not," Fitzgerald sputtered. "But there's a middle path." "There is no middle path on human dignity," Tyrone interrupted, his voice firm but not raised. "Either we treat all passengers and employees with equal respect, or we don't. Sky Nation chose the latter path for years, and now we're correcting course. Yes, there's turbulence during the adjustment, but our heading is right." The boardroom fell silent, the metaphor particularly apt for an airline company. Tyrone continued, addressing the entire board. "I understand your concerns about short-term financial impacts. They're valid. But consider the long-term costs of the path we were on. Lawsuits from discriminatory treatment, talent lost to competitors with more inclusive cultures, and brand damage in an increasingly diverse marketplace. Sometimes doing the right thing is also the smart business move, even when the balance sheet takes a temporary hit." Later that afternoon, Tyrone met with Shauna Williams, who had been working tirelessly in her new role despite facing hostility from former colleagues who viewed her as a traitor. "I'm wondering if we're moving too fast," she admitted, the strain evident in her voice. "Some of the frontline staff feel overwhelmed by the new requirements, and others are actively resistant. Maybe we should slow down implementation of some changes." Tyrone considered her perspective carefully. As someone who had risen from within the ranks, Shauna understood the day-to-day realities of implementation in ways he couldn't. "Which specific changes are causing the most resistance?" he asked. "The documentation requirements for all passenger reassignments," she replied. "Staff complain it's cumbersome and implies they can't be trusted." Tyrone nodded. "The trust was broken long ago, not by our requirements but by years of discriminatory practices. The documentation rebuilds trust through transparency. That stays. And the mandatory bias training? Also non-negotiable. But," he added, seeing her concern, "we can adjust the rollout schedule to ensure adequate staffing during the transition. The destination remains the same, even if we recalibrate the route." As they discussed implementation details, Tyrone's security team intercepted a threatening letter that had been delivered to his hotel. The anonymous message detailed his movements over the past 3 days with disturbing accuracy, concluding, "With a warning to back off before we make you regret ever stepping on that plane." The threat was a stark reminder of the deep resentments his actions had stirred. Racism, when confronted directly, rarely retreated quietly. By evening, a new crisis emerged. Advance bookings had dropped significantly following an organized social media campaign urging travelers to boycott Sky Nation. The hashtag #BoycottWokeAirlines was trending, promoted by accounts associated with various right-wing influencers and at least one competitor airline. As Tyrone convened an emergency meeting, with his financial and marketing teams, the fundamental question hung in the air. Had he pushed too far? Too fast? Was Sky Nation's financial stability now at risk because of his commitment to transformation? The data projected on the screen was sobering. If current trends continued, the airline would face significant cash flow issues within 3 months. Some advisors suggested a strategic retreat, perhaps reinstating some of the less controversial terminated executives, or framing the changes as pilot programs rather than permanent policies. Tyrone listened to all perspectives, then stood to address the room. "I understand the concerns and I appreciate the candid assessments, but there will be no retreat. Instead, we double down." He outlined his decision. Rather than backing away from the controversy, Sky Nation would lean into it with a radical transparency initiative. The company would publicly release all its discrimination data, showing exactly how minority passengers had been treated differently, alongside the specific policy changes implemented to address these issues. "Our competitive advantage moving forward isn't pretending discrimination didn't happen," Tyrone explained. "It's being the airline that faced it honestly and fixed it thoroughly. For every customer we lose to resistance, we'll gain 2 through trust." As the meeting concluded and team members dispersed to implement the new strategy, Tyrone remained in the conference room, momentarily alone with the weight of his decisions. The resistance was stronger than he had anticipated. The personal attacks, more vicious, the financial risks more immediate. Yet in this moment of greatest pressure, Tyrone Jackson felt an unexpected clarity. This wasn't just a corporate restructuring anymore. It had evolved into something more significant, a test case for whether meaningful change was possible in American institutions when those with power committed to more than symbolic gestures. The outcome remained uncertain, but the path forward was clear. There would be no compromise on the fundamental principle that had driven him since that moment at the gate. Every person deserved to be treated with equal dignity, regardless of their skin color. If transforming a corporate culture to reflect that principle required weathering storms of resistance, then Tyrone Jackson was prepared to stand firm in the gale. 6 months after the incident that had sparked a corporate revolution, Tyrone Jackson reclined in Seat 2A of Ascend Airlines Flight 457 from Chicago to New York. The leather seat, once denied to him, now enveloped him comfortably as the first-class cabin prepared for departure. The airline's new name and logo gleamed on everything from the napkins to the flight attendants' sleek uniforms, symbolizing the complete transformation of the company formerly known as Sky Nation. As he sipped his pre-takeoff sparkling water, Tyrone noticed a familiar face moving through the cabin. Miranda Whitley, now employed by a budget carrier after her termination, boarding as a deadheading crew member being transported to another airport. Their eyes met briefly, hers widening in recognition before quickly looking away. The symmetry of the moment wasn't lost on Tyrone, though he took no personal satisfaction in her downfall. This had never been about individual retribution. His mind drifted back to the tumultuous months that had followed his acquisition and the sweeping changes he had implemented. The legal challenges had been formidable. Victor Reynolds and the other terminated executives had pursued their lawsuits with venomous determination, backed by considerable resources and several political allies. The court battles had dragged on for months, generating headlines and analyst speculation about whether Pinnacle had overreached. The turning point came when a federal judge issued a comprehensive ruling that vindicated Tyrone's actions entirely. The documented pattern of discriminatory practices at Sky Nation Airlines constituted sufficient grounds for the termination of executives who implemented, enforced, or willfully ignored such practices. The judge had written, "The plaintiff's claim of reverse discrimination finds no support in the factual record." That ruling, combined with testimony from dozens of former and current employees about the toxic culture under previous leadership, had effectively ended the legal resistance. One by one, the lawsuits were dismissed or settled on terms favorable to the newly renamed Ascend Airlines. The business challenges had proven equally daunting. The boycott campaign had indeed impacted bookings initially, with revenue dropping nearly 20% in the first quarter after the takeover. Industry analysts had questioned whether the airline could survive such a significant disruption, and some board members had pushed for moderation of the reforms. Tyrone had held firm, implementing his transparency strategy with unwavering commitment. Ascend Airlines had published comprehensive data on its previous discrimination patterns alongside clear metrics for measuring improvement. Every policy change was explained in detail, with regular updates on progress. The strategy had worked better than even Tyrone had anticipated. While some customers had indeed abandoned the airline in protest, far more had been attracted by the company's honest confrontation of its past and its commitment to equitable treatment. Corporate clients, increasingly conscious of their own diversity commitments, had signed exclusive contracts with Ascend, appreciating the ability to ensure their employees would all receive first-class service regardless of their appearance. 6 months in, passenger numbers had not only recovered but increased by 17% compared to Sky Nation's pre-controversy figures. Employee satisfaction scores had risen dramatically, and applications for positions at all levels had skyrocketed, particularly from minority candidates who now viewed the company as a place where they could thrive without facing systemic barriers. "Mr. Jackson, everything to your satisfaction?" Tyrone looked up to see James Chen, now serving as Ascend's chief ethics officer, checking on passengers before taking his own seat in the cabin. Everything is excellent as usual, Tyrone replied with a genuine smile. James nodded in satisfaction. Just completed another round of policy audits. Every metric continues to improve. And the employee feedback? Overwhelmingly positive, especially from those who were skeptical initially. The culture shift is taking root. After James moved on, Tyrone returned to his reflections. Perhaps the most meaningful validation had come from industry response. Within months of Ascend's reforms, 3 other major airlines had implemented similar anti-discrimination policies and oversight mechanisms, eager to avoid becoming the next target of public scrutiny. Trade publications had begun referring to the Jackson Standards for equitable customer treatment, and several corporate diversity organizations had recognized Ascend's transformation as a case study in meaningful institutional change. Shauna Williams, who had excelled in her role as Chief Diversity Officer, was now regularly invited to speak at industry conferences about the company's journey. Her department had become a model that other corporations sought to emulate, with executives from various industries visiting Ascend headquarters to learn from their example. The most powerful moments, however, came from the personal stories that regularly reached Tyrone's desk. Young Black professionals sharing how differently they were now treated when flying Ascend, parents expressing gratitude that their children could travel without the humiliations they themselves had endured, employees describing the liberation of working in an environment where excellence was the only criterion that mattered. As the aircraft began its taxi to the runway, Tyrone's phone buzzed with one final message before he would need to switch to airplane mode. It was from his teenage daughter. "Dad, my economics class is using Ascend Airlines as our case study in ethical business transformation. Teacher doesn't know you're my father. So proud of you." The simple message touched him deeply. Beyond the business metrics and industry recognition, this was the legacy that mattered most, showing the next generation that meaningful change was possible when courage met opportunity. Midway through the flight, Tyrone was surprised when Victor Reynolds, the former CEO, approached his seat. The man had aged visibly in the months since his termination, the stress of legal battles and public scrutiny etched into his face. "Mr. Jackson," he began awkwardly, "I didn't expect to see you on this flight." Tyrone gestured to the empty seat beside him. "Join me for a moment." Reynolds hesitated, then sat. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the court ruling," he said, his voice lacking its former arrogance. "I still believe some of the changes were unnecessarily disruptive, but I've come to recognize that the core issues you identified were real. The data your team published was irrefutable." "It always was," Tyrone replied evenly. "The difference is that now it's being addressed rather than ignored." Reynolds nodded slowly. "My grandchildren asked me recently why I was on the wrong side in their history lesson about Ascend Airlines. That hit hard. History has a way of clarifying moral questions that seem complex in the moment." "Yes, it does." Reynolds paused, gathering himself. "I won't take more of your time. I just wanted to say that while I disagreed with your methods, I can't argue with the results. What you've built from the ashes of Sky Nation is impressive." After Reynolds returned to his seat, Tyrone reflected on the encounter. The man's grudging acknowledgement represented something significant, not personal vindication, but evidence that even the most entrenched resistance could eventually give way to recognition of necessary change. As the flight began its descent into New York, Tyrone noticed a young Black entrepreneur in economy class, reminiscent of the ambitious young man he had encountered at JFK that fateful day. Acting on impulse, he called over a flight attendant. "Please upgrade that young man to the empty first-class seat across from me," he instructed. "And tell him I'd be happy to discuss his business ideas during the remainder of the flight." The circle was complete. What had begun with a denied seat had culminated in the power to ensure others would never face the same indignity. The symbolic gesture represented everything Tyrone had been fighting for. Not special treatment, but equal treatment. Not revenge, but reform. Not personal advantage, but systemic change. As the young entrepreneur settled into first class with barely contained excitement, Tyrone felt a deep satisfaction that transcended the material trappings of success. The true measure of his achievement wasn't the corporate empire he had built, or the wealth he had accumulated, but the barriers he had dismantled for those who would follow. The final approach to JFK brought Tyrone's journey full circle, returning to the very airport where his first-class ticket had been denied just 6 months earlier. The newly rebranded Ascend Airlines plane touched down smoothly, its fresh logo catching the afternoon sun, a stylized bird soaring upward, symbolizing not just flight, but ascension beyond limitations. In the terminal, a group of Ascend's new customer service representatives welcomed arriving passengers with genuine warmth that reflected the company's transformed culture. Their diverse faces and backgrounds embodied the airline's commitment to representation at all levels, a commitment that had made Ascend the industry leader in both employee satisfaction and customer loyalty. As Tyrone prepared to leave the airport, he passed the very counter where Miranda had questioned his first-class ticket. Now staffed by a team that reflected America's diversity, the counter displayed a prominent sign: the Ascend Promise. Excellence is our only standard. Respect is our only currency. The physical transformation of the space mirrored the deeper institutional changes that had taken place. Changes that had initially seemed impossible against entrenched resistance, but had ultimately proven not just necessary but advantageous. Ascend's stock had recently hit an all-time high, vindicating Tyrone's insistence that ethical business was also good business. Outside the terminal, Tyrone's driver waited with the door held open. Before entering the vehicle, he paused to look back at the soaring architecture of the airport, thinking about journeys, both literal and metaphorical. 6 months ago, he had entered this space as a passenger subject to the whims of a discriminatory system. Today, he departed as the architect of that system's transformation. The driver closed the door, and as the car pulled away from the curb, Tyrone's phone lit up with a message from Amara. Forbes article just published, "The Ascend Revolution, How One Incident Transformed an Industry." They're calling it the most significant corporate culture change of the decade. Tyrone smiled slightly. Headlines and accolades were gratifying, but they weren't the true measure of what had been accomplished. The real success lay in the countless indignities that would never happen, the barriers that would never be erected, the talent that would never be suppressed. All because one man had refused to accept that discrimination was simply the cost of doing business in America. As the New York skyline spread before him, Tyrone Jackson reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From his father's barbershop in Harlem to the boardrooms of global corporations, the lesson had remained constant throughout. Real change never came from accepting unjust systems, but from transforming them. It never came from seeking exceptions for oneself, but from demanding excellence for all. The vehicle stopped at a red light, and through the window, Tyrone noticed a billboard for Ascend Airlines featuring a diverse group of passengers and crew with the tagline, "Everyone rises when everyone belongs." In that moment, he knew with certainty that what had begun as a humiliating denial of his rightful seat had evolved into something far more significant. A template for how confronting discrimination with strategic determination could transform not just one company but an entire industry's understanding of what was possible. The light turned green, and the car moved forward, just as Tyrone Jackson had pushed American business culture forward, proving that the journey toward justice, while never easy, was always worth the turbulence along the way. What would you do if you had the power to transform an entire industry? Would you use it to right the wrongs you've personally experienced? This story shows how one calculated decision changed countless lives for the better. If you believe in the power of accountability and transformation, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of justice. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that change is possible when courage meets opportunity. Thank you for watching, and remember, in the words of Tyrone Jackson, excellence has no color, and dignity is everyone's first-class ticket. This powerful story teaches us that meaningful change requires both opportunity and courage. Tyrone Jackson didn't merely seek personal vindication when faced with racism. He leveraged his position to transform an entire corporate culture. The FI lesson isn't about wealth or power, but about responsibility, using whatever influence we have to dismantle discriminatory systems rather than simply navigating around them. True leadership means addressing root causes, not just symptoms. By focusing on systemic issues rather than individual actors, Tyrone created sustainable change that outlasted the initial controversy. His approach demonstrates that accountability isn't punishment, it's a necessary step toward healing and improvement. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that economic arguments often used to resist equality. It's too disruptive. It will hurt business, frequently prove false. Ascend Airlines became more successful precisely because it confronted discrimination honestly and thoroughly. Excellence and equality aren't competing values, they're complementary. When everyone belongs, everyone rises. The transformation from Sky Nation to Ascend represents the journey America itself must make, acknowledging uncomfortable truths about discrimination, implementing concrete changes beyond symbolic gestures, and ultimately building institutions where dignity isn't determined by the color of one's skin. Has discrimination ever affected your travel experience or professional life? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters in this important conversation. If you believe businesses should be held accountable for how they treat people, hit that like button to help spread this message of transformation and justice. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about individuals who turned moments of discrimination into opportunities for meaningful change. These aren't just stories, they're blueprints for a more equitable future. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that change is possible when courage meets opportunity. Together, we can create a world where everyone receives first-class treatment regardless of appearance, background, or identity. Thank you for watching. Remember that in the journey toward justice, turbulence is inevitable, but the destination is worth it.